Today, for our running series, we are going to go over the hip hinge. The hip hinge is a fundamental movement skill that's beneficial to master for all types of activities, sports, what have you. For running in particular, it's a great way to work on posterior chain mobility, posterior chain strength, which will translate into better running economy, and even if you add in some load eventually and turn it into a deadlift, that it can help you with power going up those hills. So we'll go over the basics of a hip hinge. We're going to do both a bilateral stance and then we're going to move into a unilateral stance because of course that's more relevant to running. Equipment that you'll need for this little segment will be just a broomstick. I've got a dowel here if you've got one of those as well. And this is going to be used just for feedback for our upper body and our spinal alignment so that we maximize that posterior chain lengthening. So first and foremost though, we're going to talk about our feet and then we'll work our way up. So starting with our bilateral stance, we want to remember that tripod foot. And we want to make sure that we've got amazing ground contact. So with our feet about under our hips, you get to choose what feels really good. I wouldn't go too narrow, nor would I go too wide. So play around with what feels good under the hips. Sometimes a jumping position, so if you just sort of bounce up and down, your feet will rest in a nice place for you. Then let's open up our toes, spread them out and lay them down and then feel that nice tripod foot. So here is our stance for our hip hinge. Now, with our dowel or our broomstick, we're going to place it on our backs. And again, it's here for feedback. So it's a learning tool that you can eventually get rid of. What we want is we want that dowel to be placed at the back of our head. So there's going to be 3 points of contact, the back of our head, in between our shoulder blades, and sort of on our sacrum at the bottom of our spine. And what it's going to do, like I said, is going to give us feedback to see if we are in a nice spinal alignment. Now the reason why we want this in particular is to maximize that posterior chain lengthening. So let me just show you a hip hinge first with this, with the dowel. What we do is we have a nice micro bend in our knees. We're going to keep our legs relatively silent, our knees relatively silent. You're going to send your bum back. So you're not tipping forward onto your toes. You want to send that bum back and maintain that tripod foot. You can have a little bit more bend in your knees as you go down. You'll feel your hamstrings and maybe your calves talking to you. And then coming back up again. The one thing I want you to remember as you're pushing your bum back is that I want that weight, again, that tripod foot to stay intact and that load to be through the middle of your foot. If you're finding that you're working so hard on your toes, you're tipping forward too much. If you find your toes are coming up, you're leaning back too much. So find that sweet spot. And then with the dowel, we want to maintain those 3 points of contact throughout the movement. Now come to the point where you feel like, okay, that's as far as I can go without flexing my lumbar spine, which of course will lift the dowel off my bum, or coming into more of a squatty position and getting rid of that posterior chain lengthen. So let's try that a couple of times. Send that bum back, maintain that tripod foot. That load is going through that midfoot. You're feeling that points of contact on the dowel. Now here's a couple of tips. If you feel it lifting off your small back, maybe again you're rounding, you're coming into a little bit of flexion. Again, that will offload the posterior chain. If you feel it come off your mid-back, you're likely coming into cervical or neck extension. Okay, and this will put a little bit too much strain on that back musculature. So again, let's do a couple of reps with our bilateral stance. Now, to come up, I want you to come up into a nice bum squeeze and come into that nice hip extension. We don't want to push our hips forward. No need for that. That's lumbar extension. Just think about at the top of the movement coming up nice and tall. Okay. Try that a couple of times without the dowel and see if you can maintain that nice long spine and and therefore that nice posterior chain stretch. Okay, so you can see if we then load this movement, that we can get a little bit of lengthening and strengthening as well. Now, after you've mastered that movement, let's try a unilateral stance. Same concepts. We're going to maybe start with a kickstand rather than a free leg. You can play around with free leg, and we'll also introduce that later on in the series. So let's start with that nice tripod foot. You're going to spread those toes, feel all 3 points of contact on that foot. And nice strong leg, feeling that you've got a great self-alignment of knee, hip, and ankle all in one, that you're not sort of sitting out onto this hip here. So feeling nice and tall, and then your other foot's just going to kickstand back. So most of your load will be on that one foot. Let's replace the dowel to the back of our head so we've got that feedback. And the same thing happens again. So we just send that bum back. Most of our load is on that one foot. You're offloading maybe slightly with the kickstand foot, and you're sending that bum back. Now here, of course, we're creating more load here. So the need for extra external load like weights is less. So it's a great body weight exercise to work on mobility and strength. And then of course now we've got a little bit of less stability on that one leg. So we have to work really hard to stay nice and square with our hips and our shoulders not tipping over. Okay, let's try the other side. So again, tripod foot. Let's get our dowel on our 3 points of contact, kickstand with our other leg. Nice and tall, start in a great position, and then send that bum back and up again. So you may feel like you've got less range of motion on the one leg than the other, less range of motion with a unilateral stance compared to a bilateral stance, and that's okay. We'll work into it. So long as you've got those points, those cues down, and you're doing it well, that's all that we need. Now let's give it a try without the dowel quickly. So single leg stance, back to that first side, kickstand position, so our knees are relatively together or in the same place. Okay, so you're not out in a lunge position. It's just a little kickstand. Now think about nice and tall, pretend you've got that dowel there. Send that bum back, maintain that tripod foot, nice long neck, long spine, and feeling that posterior chain stretch, lengthening and strengthening. So it's lengthening, it's working hard to stop you from falling. So it's working, which means we're strengthening it. Okay, let's try the other side. Tripod foot, stand nice and tall, kickstand back. Get our canister aligned here. Maintain the top and the bottom of this canister as you go through the exercise. Again, nice and tall. Think about tall at the top and not sticking those hips forward. Back up again, last one. Good. Give this one a try on your own. Work on that hip hinge. And if you want to include it into your exercise routine, start with some light repetitions if they're new to you, and then you can start increasing the number of reps if it's feeling really good. Hopefully you'll feel a difference in that posterior chain. Well, it'll feel like flexibility but mobility, and then if you actually start to get a little bit of strength gain, hopefully your running will benefit from it as well.